The morning light crept slowly over the New Mexico plains, spilling gold across the sleeping land. Boone's Hollow stirred awake like a weary giant, its fences glowing amber in the first sun. The cattle were already restless, lowing softly in the chill, their breath rising in misty clouds. A wind carried the scent of dust, sagebrush, and coffee, that steady fragrance that marked another day of hard work and quiet peace. Calder Boone stepped out from his cabin, the door creaking behind him like an old friend that had seen too much. He stood tall but tired, shoulders squared beneath a weathered coat, gray hair tucked beneath a sweat-stained hat. The lines around his eyes looked carved by the desert itself, not of weakness, but of years spent facing storms that came without warning. In his right hand was a tin mug of black coffee, steaming faintly in the cold. He took a slow sip, watching the horizon as if measuring the distance to something unseen. Boone's Hollow wasn't a grand ranch. It was a modest patch of land fenced in by grit and discipline. 50 head of cattle, a few horses, and a barn built by Boone's own hands after his wife's passing 5 years back. Inside, the crackle of a stove filled the cabin. Maria Vega, his cook and housekeeper, hummed softly in Spanish as she stirred beans in a pot. Her sleeves were rolled up, dark hair tied neatly beneath a red scarf. She was a woman of quiet pride, and her laughter, when it came, sounded like music trying to heal an old wound. She had worked for Boone for 3 years now, and though neither of them ever spoke of it, there was something deeper than duty between them. She glanced at him through the window as he walked toward the corral, his boots crunching over frostbitten dirt. "Senor Boone," she called from the porch, her accent rich and soft. "You forget breakfast again." He turned slightly, the hint of a smile tugging one corner of his mouth. "Coffee's breakfast enough for me, Maria." She crossed her arms, pretending to frown. "You say that every day. One morning I will not cook, and then what will you do?" Boone lifted his hat, scratching the back of his neck. "Guess I'd have to eat my hat then." Her laughter carried through the cold air, lightening it for a moment. By mid-morning, Boone and his ranch hand, young Peter Grady, were working the southern pasture. The sun was climbing high, turning the land into a blinding sea of gold. Peter wiped sweat from his brow. "Mr. Boone," he said, "heard some talk in town yesterday. Said the McGraw gang's been seen near the river trail. Sheriff's warning folks to keep a gun close." Boone squinted toward the horizon. "Talk's been circling for weeks. Men like McGraw live on rumor as much as robbery. Don't give him both." Peter shifted uneasily in his saddle. "Still, they say they hit the Wilson ranch. Burned it down for sport." Boone's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed calm. "Wilson ran with rough men once. Trouble tends to remember its friends." The boy nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the weight behind Boone's words. Calder Boone wasn't just a rancher. There was something about the way he carried himself, like a man who'd seen justice done both right and wrong. When noon came, Maria called them in for lunch. She laid out cornbread, beans, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Peter ate quick, then rode off to mend fences near the creek. Boone lingered on the porch, cleaning the dust from his boots. Maria stood beside him, drying her hands with a cloth. "Senor Boone," she said quietly, "you think those outlaws will come here?" He shook his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "There's nothing here worth dying for. Outlaws look for gold, not sweat." She frowned. "Sometimes they take what is easy, not what is rich." He turned to her, and for a long moment, the silence between them felt like the calm before thunder. Boone nodded once, as if to promise her something he couldn't quite say. The rest of the day passed in stillness. The wind picked up, rolling small storms of dust across the plains. A hawk circled above the barn. The sky, once bright and endless, began to darken with the weight of evening clouds. Boone finished stacking hay bales, his back aching but his mind steady. As the sun dipped low, Maria lit a lantern in the kitchen window, its glow flickering like a heartbeat in the growing dusk. She looked out across the land, her hands still. The light caught her face, the kind of beauty shaped not by youth, but by endurance. Then she saw it. Far off, beyond the ridge where the desert met the sky, shadows moved. Riders, 4, maybe 5, slow and deliberate, their horses kicking up red dust against the setting sun. The sky behind them was bleeding crimson, the kind of color that spoke of violence not yet done. Her heart thudded. She stepped onto the porch, voice trembling slightly. "Senor Boone." He turned from the corral, following her gaze. The riders were too far to recognize, but the shape of their movement told him all he needed to know. Men who rode like that weren't neighbors. Boone's hand went unconsciously to his belt, but there was no gun there. Not anymore. He'd locked away his revolver the day he buried his wife. He'd sworn never to draw it again. Maria whispered, "Dios mío, who are they?" Boone stared a moment longer, his eyes narrowing. The horizon burned behind the riders, painting their silhouettes in blood and shadow. "Outlaws," he said quietly, his voice low as thunder before rain. "And they're heading this way." Maria stepped closer to him, fear rising like smoke in her chest. Boone didn't move. He just watched the approaching shapes, the wind tugging at his coat, the land around them holding its breath. The last light of day vanished behind the hills, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats echoing faintly through the hollow. Boone's hollow, quiet, humble, and peaceful no more. The moon hung low and swollen over Boone's hollow, washing the land in silver light that flickered across the barn roof and dry plains. The night had been still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Inside the cabin, Maria was closing the shutters, her candlelight trembling against the wooden walls. Calder Boone sat near the stove, mending a bridle strap, his weathered hand slow and steady. A coyote cried somewhere in the distance, and the horses answered with restless snorts. Boone looked up from his work. The sound wasn't from wild animals alone. Beneath the wind, there was something heavier, the faint, rhythmic tremor of hooves. He set down the strap and rose, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Maria froze when she saw his face change. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He crossed the room, snuffed out the lamp, and stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold enough to bite through his shirt. Out across the open plain, 5 riders emerged from the darkness, moving slow, deliberate, the moon catching the shine of their guns. Boone's breath came shallow. He didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. The McGraw gang. The one in front rode with a lazy swagger, reins held loose in one hand, a rifle slung across his shoulder like it belonged there since birth. Jed McGraw. Boone had seen his kind before, men who mistook fear for respect and cruelty for power. The riders slowed as they reached the corral. Dust rose around their horses like smoke. Jed spat, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Evening, old man," he called. "Heard tell this here's Boone's hollow. That you?" Boone stood still, eyes steady. "That's right." Jed smiled, teeth flashing under the moon. "Well, ain't that fine? We've been riding hard. Thought we'd help ourselves to some grub and whiskey. You don't mind, do ya?" Boone's jaw worked. "I ain't got whiskey. You can take some grain for your horses. That's all." The gang laughed, low, cruel, like wolves circling a wounded steer. Jed dismounted, boots crunching in the dirt. He was tall and wiry, his face half hidden beneath a greasy hat, eyes sharp with mean amusement. "No whiskey," he said, circling Boone. "A man's got to be hospitable out here. Don't you want to make your guests feel welcome?" Maria appeared in the doorway, clutching a shawl to her chest. Jed's gaze drifted toward her, lingering too long. "Now, what do we have here?" he drawled. "You didn't tell us you had company, Boone." Boone stepped between them. "Leave her out of this." Jed chuckled, brushing the dust from his coat. "Ain't planning to hurt nobody. Just want a little supper. Ain't that right, boys?" The men laughed again, dismounting one by one. Their spurs jingled as they moved toward the cabin. "Inside," Jed ordered, pushing Boone's shoulder as he walked past. "Let's see what the lady's cooking." Maria backed away, trembling as the men crowded into her small kitchen. One of them, a red-haired brute named Crow, kicked at a chair, then grabbed a pot off the stove and sniffed. "Beans," he sneered. "Smells better than the swill we've had for days." Another outlaw, young and mean-eyed, reached for Maria's arm. "Why don't you serve us, sweetheart?" Boone stepped forward. "You've had your say. Take what you need and leave." Jed turned slowly, eyes glinting. You talk like you still think you gotta say, old man. Boone stood his ground. This is my home. Jed smirked. Not tonight it ain't. Before Boone could move, one of the gang struck him across the face with a pistol. He went down hard, tasting blood, the world spinning in a haze of pain and moonlight. Maria screamed, trying to reach him, but Crow shoved her back. Stay where you are, woman, he barked. Jed leaned down, grabbing Boone by the collar. See, that's the problem with men like you, he said softly. You think you can hide behind fences and morals, but the world don't care about either. He slammed Boone's head against the dirt, once, twice, until blood stained the dust. Maria's voice broke through the noise, crying out in Spanish, pleading for them to stop. Jed turned, grinning. You got spirits, Senora. Why don't you make us supper while we rest a bit? Crow tossed her ladle into the fire. The cooking pots hissed and blackened. The smell of burning beans filled the room. The gang laughed as Maria trembled, forced to ladle food for the men who had just beaten her employer bloody. Boone groaned, trying to rise, but a boot pressed him back down. Jed crouched beside him, his voice almost tender. You could have been smart, Boone. Could have offered us a drink, maybe a story. But no, you had to play proud. I don't like proud men. He stood, wiping his hands on Boone's shirt. Boys, load up what's in the barn. Feed tools, anything worth talking. Then burn what's left. I don't fancy leaving ghosts behind. Maria's eyes widened. No, please, the barn, there are horses. Jed backhanded her. Then pray for him. Outside, torches flared. The dry hay caught fast, the fire roaring to life like it had been waiting all along. Flames licked the night sky, casting wild shadows over the land. The cattle bellowed, frightened, as smoke rolled across the yard. Boone dragged himself to his knees, coughing through blood and smoke. He could hear the laughter of the McGraw gang mixing with the crackle of the blaze. Jed stood at the edge of the firelight, hat tipped low. This here's just a reminder, Boone. The frontier don't care who you used to be. You stay quiet, and maybe we'll forget you exist. He mounted his horse, turning back once more. Tell your pretty cook to keep the stove warm. We might drop by again. The gang's laughter echoed as they rode off into the dark, their silhouettes vanishing against the burning horizon. Maria fell to her knees beside Boone, tears streaking her face. Senor, please, you must not move. He waved her off weakly, staring at the fire devouring his barn. The heat scorched his skin, the smoke clawed his lungs, but he didn't look away. He saw more than the flames. He saw everything he'd buried, the part of himself that once wore a badge, the man who believed justice could be gentle. Maria wept beside him, clutching her rosary. Boone barely heard her. The only sound that mattered was the roar of burning timber and the faint echo of hooves fading into the distance. The fire painted his bruised face in red and gold. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, reflected the inferno like a mirror to his soul. Something inside him, something old, something he thought he'd left behind, stirred awake. It was cold, heavy, and certain. That night, the man who once tended cattle buried mercy beneath the ashes. The night passed slow and cruel. Smoke still drifted from the ruins of the barn when the first gray light touched the horizon. Maria sat beside the bed, dabbing a wet cloth across Calder Boone's forehead. His face was swollen and bruised, his knuckles torn. Each breath came shallow, every movement reminding him of what had been taken. Outside, the land lay quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the hollow silence that comes after something sacred's been broken. Maria's hands trembled as she worked. She had seen men beaten before, but not like this. Not a man who took pain without a cry, whose anger burned behind calm eyes. She wished he would curse, shout, anything. Instead, Boone just stared at the ceiling, his mind somewhere far away. You need rest, she whispered. He blinked slowly. Rest won't bring back what they burned. Maria's voice cracked. Senor Boone, you cannot go after them. You'll be killed. He turned his head toward her, the faintest trace of a smile breaking the bruises on his face. You think I'm riding to die? I think, she said softly, you already have. Her words hung in the air like drifting smoke. Boone looked away. She dipped the cloth again, pressing it to his temple. "You have kind eyes, Maria," he murmured. "Kind eyes don't belong in a place like this." "Then you must not darken them further," she said quickly. "Let the sheriff handle this." Boone almost laughed, a low, bitter sound that wasn't amusement at all. "The sheriff's a good man, but the law don't reach where men like McGraw roam. I know that better than most." Her eyes lifted to his. "Why do you say it like that?" He said nothing for a long time, then exhaled slowly. "Because I've seen the law fail. I've been the law, and I've failed with it." Maria frowned, not understanding. Boone's gaze drifted to the window, where the last embers outside flickered in the dawn. The light caught the scars on his hand, old, white lines that ran deep, as if carved by memory. "I used to wear a star," he said quietly. "Long ago." Maria froze, the cloth falling from her hand. He spoke like a man confessing to the wind. "They called me the Iron Judge. U.S. Marshal out of Abilene. Folks said I had a heart of stone, and maybe they were right. I hunted the worst of 'em, thieves, killers, men who thought justice was a joke. I gave 'em reason to believe otherwise." He paused, eyes far away. "One day, justice stopped knocking on doors and came crashing through mine." Maria's hand went to her mouth. Boone's voice turned rough, almost a whisper. "A gang I'd put away once, their kin came for me. I wasn't home. My wife, Sarah, was." He swallowed hard. "They didn't take gold, didn't take cattle. They took her. Left her where I could find her. Tied to the post I built myself." The silence afterward was unbearable. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Boone stared at the wall. "I hunted them down. All of them. When it was done, I looked at my hands and realized I couldn't tell justice from vengeance anymore. So I buried my badge beside her and rode south till the law forgot my name." Maria wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. "And now it begins again." He looked at her then, really looked. "It never ended, Maria. I just pretended it did." The wind outside rattled the window. Somewhere, a horse whinnied from the paddock, restless from the scent of smoke. Boone swung his legs off the bed. "Senor Boone, you can barely stand," she cried, reaching for him. He steadied himself on the wall, every muscle screaming in protest. "I ain't standing to fight. I'm standing to remember." She moved in front of him, eyes desperate. "You swore never to draw again. You told me once." He met her gaze, weary but unflinching. "I swore that for her sake. But she's gone, and they shamed what she left me to protect." Maria's tears fell freely now. "If you go after them, you will lose what little soul you have left." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, voice soft as dusk. "I lost that the day they lit my barn." Before dawn fully broke, Boone saddled his old chestnut horse, a creature nearly as scarred and silent as its master. The frost on the ground cracked beneath his boots. Maria followed him to the porch, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Town," he said simply. "There's something I buried there, too." The ride into town was long and quiet. The early light spilled gold over the ridges, catching on the ash still clinging to his coat. As he approached the main street, a few townsfolk looked up, surprised to see Boone, the recluse rancher who kept to himself, riding in before sunrise. He tied his horse outside the blacksmith shop and stepped inside. The air smelled of oil and hot metal. The blacksmith, a burly man named Garner, looked up from his forge. "Well, I'll be damned," Garner said. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Boone." Boone nodded once. "I need the box I left you." Garner's brows furrowed. "That box. You told me to melt it down if you didn't come for it." Boone's tone was calm, but his eyes were steel. "I'm here now." With a sigh, Garner went to the back of the shop. He returned carrying an old iron lockbox coated in dust. Boone took it, setting it on the workbench. The hinges creaked as he opened it. Inside lay a revolver, a Colt Peacemaker, its steel polished but scarred. The words "Justice rides with me" engraved along the barrel. Boone lifted it slowly, the weight familiar, terrible, and comforting all at once. He spun the chamber once, listening to the sound it made, a sound like memory clicking into place. The door swung open. Sheriff Dalton stepped inside, his hand resting on his own holster. He was a younger man than Boone, but not by much, his eyes carrying the same tired knowledge. "You really gonna do this, Boone?" Dalton asked. Boone didn't look up from the gun. "Ain't got much choice." "You always got a choice," the sheriff said quietly. "You draw again, and this town will never know peace. You taught me that once." Boone holstered the gun, the leather creaking. "Peace died when they touched my home." The sheriff's mouth tightened. "You go out there. You'll bring McGraws down on everyone. You'll start a war you can't finish." Boone turned for the door, his shadow long and dark in the forge light. "Then it's a war that's already begun." He stepped out into the dawn. The sun was just cresting the hills, spilling red light over the horizon. It glinted off the revolver at his side, like fire awakening from sleep. Maria watched from the porch miles away, hands clasped over her heart. She could see his shape far off on the trail, moving slow but certain, like a man riding toward something older than death itself. She whispered a prayer into the cold morning air, a prayer that God would watch over him or forgive him if he could not. And as the wind carried her voice across the hollow, Calder Boone rode on, silent as judgment, the past rising behind him like a shadow that had finally found its shape. The desert stretched out like an open wound beneath a punishing sun. Calder Boone rode through it in silence, his shadow long and thin across the sand. The heat shimmered off the canyon walls, and each hoofbeat echoed like the tick of a clock running out. His coat was torn, his hat rimmed with dust, and the revolver at his hip, "Justice rides with me," glinted faintly beneath the glare. Days had passed since he'd left Boone's Hollow. The trail of the McGraw gang was easy to follow, too easy. They weren't hiding. They were flaunting their wake of ruin like a brand of pride. Along the trail, Calder passed what was left of a settler's wagon, half-burned, its wheels broken, the earth around it scattered with spilled flour and children's toys. Buzzards circled above. He dismounted, removing his hat. In the sand lay a man's body, face down, a bullet in his back. Calder's jaw tightened. He knelt, rolling the man over, a farmer, maybe 30, eyes open to the sun. The man's hand was still clutching a photograph of his wife and child. Boone placed a photo on the man's chest, covering his face with a strip of torn cloth. "Rest easy," he muttered. "Justice is coming." He mounted again and spurred his horse west. The trail led through a canyon cut deep by centuries of wind and rain, narrow, twisting, a place where echoes lived longer than men. He rode slow, rifle in hand, every sense sharpened. Somewhere ahead, the faint glint of metal caught his eye, a spent shell casing fresh. The McGraw gang had passed through within hours. By nightfall, he reached an old mining camp, a scatter of rotted shacks and rusted carts, abandoned to time. A campfire still smoldered in the center. Boone dismounted and approached quietly. That's when he saw him, a young man slumped against a boulder, clutching his leg. Blood soaked his pants, and beside him lay a broken rifle. The boy lifted his head weakly. His face was pale under the dirt, no more than 20. When he saw Boone, his hand twitched toward his gun, but Boone's revolver was already aimed steady at his chest. "Don't," Boone said calmly. "You ain't in no shape to finish what your gang started." The boy's hand dropped. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking nervously to Boone's badge scar, still faintly visible on his coat. You that rancher they jumped." Boone crouched beside him, studying his wound. "I'm a man following a trail. You one of McGraw's boys." The boy winced as Boone tightened a torn cloth around his leg. "Guess I ain't now. What happened?" "Jed don't wait for the week. We got in a fight with some railroad guards yesterday. Bullet caught me. He said I was slowing him down. Left me to die." Boone's eyes were cold. "Sounds about right." The boy looked up at him. "You gonna kill me?" Boone paused. "If I was, you'd already be dead." The boy blinked, unsure if that was mercy or mockery. "You got a name?" Boone asked. "Eli." Boone nodded once. "All right, Eli. You tell me where they're headed. I'll see you don't bleed out here." Eli hesitated, eyes darting between Boone's gun and the dark horizon. Finally he sighed. "They're going to Devil's Basin." Stagecoach coming through tomorrow morning. Carry in bank gold and mail. Jed says it'll make us legends. Boone's face hardened. Legends don't leave dead families behind. Eli's expression shifted, something pained flickering in his eyes. You don't know him like I do. Jed saved my life once. I was a kid living on scraps in Abilene. Some drunk tried to hang me for stealing bread. Jed cut me down, gave me a horse and a name. That's more than any lawman ever did. Boone's gaze didn't waver. A man's salvation don't excuse his damnation, son. Eli's lips trembled. He ain't all bad. Boone stood, holstering his revolver. Then pray I find the part that is. He left a canteen beside the boy and mounted up again. There's a rail camp east of here. If you can walk by sunrise, head there. Tell them Boone sent you. Eli nodded faintly, his voice small. You really think you can take him? Boone glanced back, the wind tugging at his coat. I don't think. I know. He rode into the night. The moon was rising now, pale and wide over the desert. He followed the trail to Devil's Basin, a place locals called the Throat of Hell. The land dropped into a massive hollow, surrounded by jagged cliffs. Sparse brush and boulders dotted the floor below, offering just enough cover for men who knew how to use it. Boone dismounted at the ridge, tying his horse in the shadow of a mesquite tree. He scooped a handful of ash from a dead fire pit and rubbed it across his horse's flank, dulling its color to gray. Ghosts ride quieter, he muttered. Then he crept down into the basin. He found them by sound first, the rough laughter of men too sure of themselves. The McGraw gang had made camp in the hollow. 5 men around a fire, drinking, cleaning guns. Their horses were tied near the canyon wall. Boone's eyes scanned the shadows, noting their rifles propped on rocks, their gear scattered loose. He moved like a phantom through the brush. The first man never saw him. A gloved hand clamped over his mouth. A knife flashed once, clean and silent. The body slumped without a sound. Boone dragged him behind a boulder, taking his rifle. The second one was half drunk, humming a tune, his back turned. Boone fired once, a muffled shot from the rifle. The man dropped where he stood, falling forward into the firelight. The others jumped to their feet, startled. What in hell? One shouted, spinning around. Boone's voice came from the darkness, low and steady. Justice rides with me. Panic rippled through the camp. Bullets tore through the night, ricocheting off stone, but Boone had already moved. He fired from behind a fallen log, hitting one man square in the chest. Another fled toward the canyon mouth, but Boone's revolver barked once, a single, perfect shot. The man tumbled into the sand. Jed McGraw, the last standing, dove behind his horse, firing blind into the dark. You think you can kill me, Boone? You ain't got the stomach for it, he yelled, laughter twisting through his voice. Boone's reply was cold. You'll find out come sunrise. The gunfire stopped. Only the crackle of the fire and the whimpering of a wounded horse filled the air. Boone waited, patient, revolver drawn, until the night grew still again. Then he stepped into the open, the flames lighting his face, calm, deadly, unshaken. 2 bodies lay at his feet, both men who had ridden with McGraw to his ranch. He looked down at them, jaw tight. One still had his old ranch knife in his belt, the one they'd taken when they burned his home. Boone bent, retrieving it, his reflection wavering in the blade. He slid it back into his belt, the weight of it like a promise fulfilled halfway. Somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed faintly. Jed McGraw's, retreating deeper into the desert. Boone holstered his revolver, mounting his horse once more. The wind howled through the canyon like a restless ghost, carrying the smell of blood and gunpowder. The final reckoning was near. Boone felt it in his bones, the tightening of the world before justice finally struck. He turned his horse toward the sound of retreating hooves, whispering to the night, "There ain't no running from what's coming, Jed." And as he rode into the darkness, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn when ghosts and men would meet, and only one would ride out alive.